Okay. Welcome to part 2 of basically me going through my original, just a selective stack of my original comic book collection of comics that I pretty much had since I was actually reading comic books, and I have gotten back to getting comic books again, like I stated in the first part, but it just took a long time for me to really get back into even doing comic books again and getting them and reading them and so on. But here, this is all focused on the ones I've had for a long time, so this is again from my personal collection. So the first part was on, I felt was probably music related, and even with one movie related comic that would have been Toxic Avenger issue number 2. So, but for this one, this is all, let's say, pretty much at least most of my originals in here, but it is also selective of some of my favorite Marvel Comics stuff in general, like my characters and so on. So here, kicking off with this, I'll be getting into is definitely one of my favorite Marvel Comics characters, but also and will have a small relation to another comic book creator that I showed the last video. So here we have some of these are reprints, like for in general, number 132, Daredevil, of course, finally just getting into it. This would have been the second full appearance of Bullseye. That'd be him right there. But this is the Marvel Legends toy reprint, and this was like given to me as a birthday gift. It would have been for Bullseye, actually. It would have been the Bullseye figure, but which I'm kind of surprised that they chose the second full appearance and not the first full appearance, which would have been, I believe, would have been maybe 131. But this is again 132. Pretty cool though. I love it. Obviously read it quite a bit of times to begin with, though it's been a long time since I've actually read it, so my memory may not be the freshest here. Like with most of these, my memory may not be all the freshest, but still, I've always enjoyed the Daredevil character to begin with, and of course I'm a big fan anyways of the series that was for Netflix with Charlie Cox playing Daredevil. So I'm a much bigger fan of that series than I am the one with Ben Affleck, which came out around the time I was pretty much starting to get into the Daredevil character. So there's that, Daredevil number 132. And here's another Marvel Legends reprint. This would have been my replacement Daredevil figure, which I'll get to the comic book that was my first Daredevil figure, but this is 164. This is definitely several issues later. This is actually I don't know if the cover was drawn by Frank Miller, but I know Frank Miller was doing the Daredevil comics around this time. So still, it's a reprint. This, compared to 132, this has seen better days. But again, I've always loved reading this comic too. So, there you go. Daredevil 164. And finally, let's get into definitely a much later 80s Daredevil comic. And this is a reprint, though it almost looks like an OG. But it is Daredevil 241, and this is the one that's in, tied to another creator that I just showed in the last video, that being Todd McFarlane. This was actually one of the first comics he started doing for Marvel. So he's just started working for Marvel around this time when he did this comic, but he didn't draw the cover. He's doing the interior for the comic. And the one thing that's really noticeable about this early Todd McFarlane Marvel era comic is because since he was just starting out at Marvel during this period, he hadn't really still yet developed his style. Again, if you're familiar with any of his classic comics that he did for Marvel, like The Amazing Spider-Man and The Incredible Hulk 340, and especially the stuff he was doing with Spawn and so on, then this is going to be a little more primitive in comparison. So he hadn't quite developed his style yet. It was still in his infancy. But you can still see the beginnings of what was eventually going to really become the classic Todd McFarlane style. Still, it's a very great piece, and again, one of my favorites I read as a kid. And this is also one that's kind of a holidays sort of connected issue or something, you know. But again, this was like published in April of 1986, as it says, as with a lot of these comic books, they usually would put the month on the under the number, and then on the side here, it says 87, but it comes to some it was either 86 or 87. But yeah, he would have started doing this stuff around here. So there you go. So again, this is a reprint, Marvel Legends reprint from the early 2000s. Had this since I was a kid, obviously. Obviously, the toy broke a long time ago, but again, I kept the book. So, I always would keep the books. If the toys didn't last forever after I take them out of the box, the books are the ones that ended up staying in peace. So, but again, this one has definitely seen some better days, but it still stayed with me. It's one of my personal childhood pieces here. So, this is definitely when I was a little younger. There you go. Daredevil 241. And here's another one that was around the time that I was starting to really get into Daredevil. And this is, speaking again, more Frank Miller. This is Frank Miller's Daredevil, The Man Without Fear, issue number 1. This was kind of his sort of take on the character when he finally kind of, I guess, re-teamed up with Marvel in the early 90s. So, here it is. Again, this was Frank Miller, and the cover again. I've got some of the other issues from this series here, or at least this. I want to say it was a 5-issue run. It was only 5 issues. Again, all these issues would have been drawn by none other than John Romita Jr., the son of, John Romita, best known for doing Spider-Man in the 70s. I think late 60s, and especially well into the maybe close to the first or last bit of the second half of the 70s before his son here started really taking over. So, definitely always kind of lacked in. Again, this is also the stuff that inspired the Netflix TV show. So this is just where that idea really came from to begin with. Yeah, this was it. Frank Miller's retelling of Daredevil's origin story. How Matt Murdock becomes Daredevil. And speaking of one from since I've really had a kid, this was actually one of the earliest comic books I had gotten as a kid. But this would have been from around the time that the Ben Affleck film was coming out. But this is the only. It was a one-shot comic. Daredevil, Bullseye, The Target. It was one that Kevin Smith had written for Marvel. So this would have been around the time that the movie was coming out. So I've had this for again. This is a really, really older comic for me. Really, this is a childhood one. And I always liked the cover. I always thought it was cool, so that's why I ended up wanting to get it at an early age. It was like, oh, look at that. So, and again, now I was becoming a big Daredevil fan, so I had to have at least this. So this is, again, compared to some of those, these were definitely ones I had picked up from, I want to take it would have been the now defunct Heroes Comics in Fresno, California. So, there you go. Daredevil, Bullseye, The Target. All right, so let's get into something that I almost thought about putting this with the music related, but I kind of thought that would have been pushing it too much just because of it kind of turns out the song wasn't really inspired by the character in anyways, but Marvel and so on had to kind of associate it with that song anyways, but it is Iron Man. So this is more of an upgrade, because the original, which I actually kind of have somewhere. I've got the original. What the reason why I end up had to really upgrade. Where is it? Did I take it out already? I must have took it out already. Because there's a... I thought I would have taken it out. Because I got some stacks up on here. Here it is. See, this is the original, and as you can probably tell, there's a reason why I had to upgrade. This was in piss poor shape. This had definitely... that's why I wanted an upgrade for this one. So, it may not be a newsstand like this one was, but still, I wanted at least a much better copy of this comic. Again, it's $2.99 from like December of 1993. Could have been January of '94. Still, $2.99. Iron Man. It's just one of those personal childhood favorites I loved reading. So that's the reason why I had to have a upgraded copy. And more Iron Man, but this is a Marvel Action Hour #1. Iron Man #1, basically. I think there's might be some more within this series. Now, this one's actually may not be a total high grade, but it's definitely still, besides maybe a couple ticks and some slight wear on the side or so on the corners. But other than that, this was actually one that surprisingly has stayed in much decent shape. But the reason this is a part of this because I've had this for a long time. It could have been my brother's for all I knew, but I inherited it anyways or took it. But it's a cool comic anyway. This would have been around just to cash in on the animated series for Fox Kids, so that's kind of why. So it's just it just brings me back to my childhood, and this for this particular comic. Again, Iron Man, War Machine, the Julia Carpenter Spider-Girl, Hawkeye, and there's a couple characters I'm not quite familiar with. It would have been these two right there. But I know this guy was actually part of, like, what is it, the Brothers in Arms sort of comic, which would have been like a flip side of another Iron Man comic that I actually have within there, but I don't want to completely make this video for too long. There you go. Marvel Action Hour, Iron Man #1. I'll put those over. Here comes one of my personal favorite Marvel characters. Now, if Daredevil is considered one of my favorite Marvel characters, or let's say non-Marvel being Spawn, the equivalent of that would be the Punisher. And this was the comic cover that freaking sold me. This is one that sold me on the Punisher in general. And this was before I even was knew about the Dolph Lundgren film, and before I even ended up knowing, or at least around the time that, definitely by the time the Thomas Jane film was coming out, I was a Punisher fan already. But this was one that sold me as a little kid, just seeing this comic cover and just going, yep, I gotta read that. I gotta read at least most of his comics. So, The Punisher. This is issue number 75. And this one has seen better days. I do have an upgraded copy of this one. But this is, since I kind of have that one put in with another comic or something right now, and I don't feel like taking a whole bunch of stuff out of a bag. But this was out of a bag to begin with. So this is the original that I've had since I was a little kid. But yeah, The Punisher, number 75, to me is one of the most iconic covers, in my opinion. This is what sold me on the character. And speaking of also ones that I've had since 2008, around the time I got the Kiss 4K. This is it's a Nam cover, Nam like Vietnam, but it was Punisher related. This was actually part 2 of 3 sort of saga story, but this was obviously the telling of Frank Castle in Vietnam. So this was that. Because again, they had to give a little more backstory of what Frank Castle was doing in war before he came back, and eventually, well, we all know what happened for Frank Castle and how he became the Punisher, but they wanted to kind of tell this little war story, so this was that. So I just wanted it anyways because it was the Punisher, and I wanted a Punisher comic in 2008. There you go. And here's one I've had around the time I got the Daredevil, the Target comic. Might have been earlier. Might have been around when this comic book came out. But it is definitely part of one of the more early 2000s Punisher series. But it's number 4. And I always kind of thought it was a much more unique look. Especially with that in general. That weird look. Almost alien-like skull. I just thought it was so cool to begin with, so I had to have at least at that time, an earlier or later sort of Punisher comic. So this would have been like 2000, I would have believed, and this obviously is one of the ones that ended up inspiring the movies, especially I believe the one with Thomas Jane and eventually Warzone. And I would say even to the one with John Berthel, the series. But again, obviously, I've always had a fun time reading this comic book as a kid. So, Punisher number 4 from 2000. And speaking around the time of the Thomas Jane film, when you went to go see the Thomas Jane Punisher film from 2004, along with your ticket would have been a free copy of the reprint for Amazing Spider-Man 229. Or 129, excuse me. 129. And the only difference that really sets this reprint apart from the original is the inclusion of the Punisher logo, because of it would have been the Jackal, because this was also a first appearance for a character named the Jackal. But over time, because of the popularity of the Punisher, he became the one that was most associated with this particular comic. So the reprint, they decided they had to put the Punisher logo on here. So make it even more abundantly clear that this is the first appearance of the Punisher, other than leaving it up on top of there when it was like originally. Still, there's the only way I was ever going to ever have a copy of 129, because there's no way in hell I'm ever going to get a copy of an OG copy, because of an OG goes for a shit ton of money. It is definitely worth like thousands of bucks at this point. I've never seen a copy any more lower than maybe 1,000 at least, but for the most part it goes for a lot of money. It is unbelievable. So this reprint does it for me, and I have like 2 copies of it. Speaking of ones from that was a childhood favorite, but this is also a upgraded as well. This is actually an upgraded copy, but it's Amazing Spider-Man 362. And this would have been the second full appearance of Carnage. So that's why. And it was definitely a favorite of mine growing up reading, because along with my brother, we were fans of Venom. So we liked the character in general and Carnage. But this, I had the original OG that I've had. Not the worst shape, but it could have seemed better, and that's kind of why I felt like upgrading. So this is what this is. It's an upgrade, but it's a part of this one because, again, this was a childhood favorite growing up. Speaking of some I've had since I was around the time of when I had the Punisher comic and the Daredevil. Actually, this would have been much more earlier. But this is my only sole Ultimate Spider-Man, and it is number 1. and this would have been the KB Toys pressing, because this had, when this was released, plenty of store chains had gotten their sort of own pressing of the comic. And it was the only way you tell is by the barcode, mostly. It would have been the barcode that would have kind of set the pressings apart from each other. So this may not be the sort of first direct edition. It still was around the time that this was released. It would be like a direct edition or so for that is worth a lot of money these days. But still, this is one of my originals, and it had seen better days, obviously. But it's one of my personal favorites. I love this comic to begin with, so that's why it's in there. Now, here we go. As some reprints, more reprints here. But this would have came with the my copy of the box set for Spider-Man. With the Sam Raimi and Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie from 2002, but it's the reprint of Amazing Fantasy number 15. That'd be the first appearance of Spider-Man. So that's why it's within this video here. Again, had it for a long time, this reprint. But it is obviously one of those I'm really love to have. I was cherished to have it in a long ways. It's just one of those comics I was like, oh my god, I have Amazing Fantasy number 15. Even though it's not an original, no way in hell I'm ever going to have an original. It is one of those valuable books, but this is my reprint of the book anyway, so Amazing Fantasy number 15. Because a comic book collection cannot be complete without Amazing Fantasy number 15, the first appearance of Spider-Man. So besides Spider-Man, Punisher, Daredevil, one of my other favorite characters is the Ghost Rider. And this is my OG, this would be a Marvel Legends reprint of it, but this is number 2. This would have been the Danny Ketch, Ghost Rider. Not the original Johnny Blaze, nor even the old Western versions of the Ghost Rider, which I have a couple of comics with the Western Ghost Rider. So, this is my original number 2 that came with the Ghost Rider figure of this Danny Ketch Ghost Rider from the early. This would have been the 90s Ghost Rider is what would be better appropriate. Again, Marvel Legends reprint from the early 2000s. And speaking of more Ghost Rider 90s Marvel Legends reprints, here we have this 39, which this had came with my figure of Vengeance, which would be that character right there. Of the Ghost Rider, basically. So this again, it's a reprint of this particular comic. Now, this is probably one of close to the last times I was getting comic books. But this again, it's a Marvel Legends reprint. Basically, Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. number 1. But the weird thing about this particular reprint is that they chose the iconic Jim Steranko art cover that was made for, I believe it would have been issue number 4. And I've always thought that was kind of weird. I'm going on a limb and saying it had been like number 4. So I don't know, understand, because again, it would have been like the S.H.I.E.L.D. origin issue as it says here. But it's really, this is issue number 1. I don't know why the hell they went and repackaged it like that. So for the longest time, I always kind of thought this was the cover for number 1 until when looking up online and searching up all the Nick Fury Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. comics from the, at least that was that part of the Silver Age, late 60s. It blew my mind that this was the cover for number 4 and not number 1, so I don't understand why. It would have been like the first appearance of, I think, the character named Scorpio, so I don't understand why they did that. Even though it is an iconic cover from Jim Steranko, but it's not the appropriate cover for this particular comic. It's not for number 1. So, there you go. An oddity. Speaking of Nick Fury, here's a really early Nick Fury comic. This is definitely a comic that has seen way better days. But it is Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos King Size Special number 4. Funny enough, I actually have number 3, but that was like a most recent pickup. But I just had to throw it in there anyway since I was showing that Nick Fury Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. So I had to at least show an original Silver Age comic in here. So there you go. Here we go. One of the final comics I had ever bought or got in like around the time I really started getting more music, especially Motorhead and so on in like 2009. But this was for my Luke Cage figure. So it is the Marvel Legends reprint of Hero for Hire number 1. Now, this is definitely a much older comic. This would be like a Bronze Age, but it's a Bronze Age reprint of a Silver Age Avengers comic. So here we get into some Avengers here. Very couple, though, here. But it is the Marvel Super Action reprint of... I keep forgetting which particular Avengers issue, but it's gotta be... I've always thought it was like number 64, maybe for some reason, or was it 62? But it would have been the first appearance of Goliath. But it is a reprint of that from the, again, 80s. That's why we say Bronze Age. Bronze Age reprint. There you go. That'd be Marvel Super Action number 24. And here we go. Here's a Marvel Legends reprint. This was given to me by my late Uncle Tony here. This would be in with my Hawkeye figure that he gave me. But it is the Marvel Legends reprint of Avengers 223. Again, considered one of the most iconic covers as well for the Bronze Age Avengers comics. But again, the Ant-Man on Hawkeye's bow and arrow. But it's a reprint. Still, read it a lot. Now, speaking of some earlier Bronze Age stuff, this was actually given to me by my dad. And this has definitely seen some slightly better days, but it's still a favorite, and I've always kind of thought it was a cool comic to begin with, and I read it a lot. But it is a super villain team-up number 13, which is Doctor Doom and Namor the Submariner with Krang. So yeah, there you go. This would have been from like 1977. There you go. Finally, a comic book sort of run through of my personal collection sort of video can't be complete without showing at least one DC comic. And guess what? It's a Batman. This is $3.99. And this would have been like close to the mid-80s. This is definitely what we refer to as the Copper Age period comic book. But I've always kind of loved the artwork. I thought it was like one of the more gruesome sort of covers for a Batman comic. So I always kind of thought it looked awesome. So I had to really have this. So it's definitely had since I was a kid. So it was really cool. I gotta end this video right now because my battery's about to go dead. So I hope all of you enjoyed that. That was definitely my rundown of my personal comic book collection. If there's any favorites within here or any ones you kind of thought was cool, let me know in the comment section below. So until then, I'll definitely be doing some here and there sporadically some comic book videos. But until then, this is Every Thrice saying I'm out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.